They're calling it the Big Beautiful Bill, and whether you love it or hate it, this thing could flip the financial system on its head. Because deep inside the 900-page proposal, beneath the infrastructure language and tax code revisions, are three sections almost no one is talking about. And if they make it through, they'll change the relationship between the Federal Reserve, Congress, and the American people, possibly forever. This isn't a theory. It passed the House earlier this summer with Republican support, and it's gaining momentum in the Senate with a coalition of populist fiscal hawks who believe the U.S. has lost control of its own balance sheet. They say it's time to take power back, and they've written it down in black and white. The official name of the proposal is the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, House Resolution 1. And depending on how this plays out, that title might go down as the most consequential piece of financial legislation in a generation, a signal that America's monetary system is about to enter uncharted territory. So what's actually in it? And why are some experts warning that this could unleash a financial earthquake beneath the surface? Let's break it down. At first glance, the bill looks like a classic fiscal reform package. It calls for budget caps, IRS clawbacks, and targeted infrastructure funding. But buried deeper in the text are three critical provisions that challenge the current structure of U.S. monetary authority. The first, a full independent audit of America's gold reserves, including physical verification of bars held at Fort Knox, West Point, and the Denver Mint. That may sound symbolic, but it's a direct shot at the Federal Reserve's long-standing secrecy around collateral assets and central bank transparency. The audit mandate would force the Treasury to work with third-party forensic accountants to verify not just the quantity of gold held, but also its quality, chain of custody, and whether it's been encumbered in any way. In short, it's a sovereignty test for the U.S. monetary base. The second major provision is even more controversial. The bill proposes reallocating IRS enforcement funds previously expanded under the Inflation Reduction Act towards state-based infrastructure bonds and small business investment incentives. That means tens of billions of dollars will be pulled away from federal tax enforcement, redirected into local capital markets. Supporters say it's about empowering communities and restoring entrepreneurial dynamism. Critics call it fiscal sabotage. But either way, the numbers are huge, and the implications are bigger. The third provision is the one drawing the most attention on Wall Street. It reasserts congressional oversight over certain emergency powers currently held by the Federal Reserve, specifically around emergency lending during financial crises. Under this bill, the Fed would need congressional approval to deploy programs like those used in 2008 or 2020, where trillions in liquidity were injected into the system without direct voter accountability. For some, that's a necessary check on central bank overreach. For others, it's a dangerous limitation on the Fed's ability to act quickly in a crisis. But here's where it gets deeper. The Big Beautiful Bill isn't just about laws. It's about narrative power, and that's where things get politically potent. Supporters argue that for too long, unelected officials and opaque institutions have controlled America's financial destiny. This bill, they say, returns power to elected representatives and the states. And they're not just talking about monetary policy. According to internal memos shared among Capitol Hill aides, there are early discussions about linking this bill to future legislation that would revisit the dollar's global reserve role, possibly including commodity-backed pilot programs at the state level. Sound far-fetched? Not anymore. Texas has already launched a state-administered gold-backed digital currency. Wyoming and Florida are exploring similar moves, and international momentum is building for alternative financial structures outside the SWIFT system and beyond the dollar's reach. This bill, if passed, could legitimize those efforts. And there's another layer nobody's talking about. Some analysts believe this bill could serve as a legal precedent, a model for other nations looking to decouple from centralized global monetary systems. If that happens, we could witness a broader sovereign finance movement where countries increasingly bypass the traditional IMF World Bank structures in favor of decentralized capital controls. That would reshape how economic alliances form and how crises are managed. It's not just about America, it's about setting a new global tone. And within the U.S., this also opens the door to more state-level financial experimentation. If infrastructure funding is redirected to states, we could see red and blue states taking radically different paths, building separate economic identities, and even competing for capital with different tax, energy, and currency policies. That kind of fragmentation could either unlock innovation or fracture fiscal unity. And if current debt trends continue, pressure will only mount for creative fiscal reform. As of June 30th, 2025, the U.S. federal debt is now over 123% of GDP and projected to surpass 130% by 2034, according to the latest CBO estimates. Treasury yields remain elevated. Net interest costs are expected to consume nearly a third of federal revenue within the decade. This is the backdrop behind the bill's urgency. It's not just ideological, it's structural. Washington is running out of room to maneuver, and the people pushing this bill know it. And with trust in institutions at historic lows, the appetite for bold reform is surging. They believe this is the last window to re-anchor financial power in Democratic hands before external shocks, debt spirals, or dollar decline make that impossible. But here's the real wild card. If this bill passes, it may trigger a wave of similar efforts, not just at the state level, but globally. Already, countries like Brazil, Russia, and India are exploring alternatives to the dollar-based system. And central bank digital currencies are rapidly gaining traction, potentially bypassing U.S. oversight altogether. This means the big, beautiful bill could become more than just legislation. It could become a rallying point for a post-dollar global economy. And if that happens, America's entire leverage in trade, sanctions, and financial diplomacy could begin to erode faster than anyone expects. Even domestically, the ripple effects would be immense. Markets would recalibrate. Bond markets could face new volatility. The dollar's reserve status would no longer be untouchable. And in that world, the margin for error is gone. Because when the foundation shifts, there's no going back to the old rules. And that's why more analysts, investors, and policymakers are finally paying attention. This bill isn't fringe anymore. It's forcing a long overdue conversation about control, transparency, and what kind of future America is willing to build. So where does this all lead? That's the question gripping economists, investors, and policymakers right now. Because whether this bill becomes law or simply reshapes public discourse, the ripple effects are already being felt in real time. That depends on the Senate. If the bill is passed in full, it will set up a showdown between the Fed, the White House, and a rising wave of populist lawmakers who want to overhaul how money works in America. And even if parts of it are stripped or delayed, the movement is clearly growing. A financial realignment is coming. Whether you believe in the big, beautiful bill or not, this is an opening move in a much bigger game. And the stakes go far beyond what the headlines are telling you. Because when the next shift hits, those who waited for permission will already be too late. If you want to stay ahead of the next major economic shift, subscribe now. Because the people who understand what's really happening will be the ones who own the future.